Princess Nari stared at her father with wide, horrified eyes. The Crystal Palace throne room felt cold despite the warm light streaming through the translucent walls. Emperor Daiho had just spoken words that made her blood freeze. "You will marry the human warrior, Jiho Kim," he said again, his voice firm and final. Nari's crystalline skin flickered with pale blue light, a sign of deep distress among her people. She stepped backward, her long silver hair flowing like liquid metal. "No, father, please no. Not a human." The emperor's expression softened slightly as he looked at his daughter. She was his only child, the light of his life. But he was also the ruler of the Valerian Empire, and his people's survival came before personal feelings. "Daughter, you must understand. We have no choice." Nari shook her head frantically. "There is always a choice. We could fight. We could run. We could hide in the far systems and watch our people die." Daiho stood from his crystal throne, his tall form casting long shadows. "The humans control the space on both sides of our empire. They grow stronger every day while we grow weaker. This marriage is our only path to peace." Nari had heard the stories about humans since she was a child. They were monsters who lived short, violent lives. They destroyed beautiful worlds and turned space battles into bloody massacres. They never surrendered, never showed mercy, never backed down from a fight. The worst stories came from the Battle of Kepler 442. A single human fleet had held off the entire Zephyrian armada for 3 months. When the Zephyrians finally retreated, half their ships were nothing but floating debris. The humans had lost most of their fleet too, but they kept fighting until the end. Then there was the siege of New Arcturus. Human ground forces had fought street by street for 2 years. They ate rats and drank dirty water, but they never gave up. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found humans still fighting with broken weapons and empty stomachs. "This captain, Jiho Kim," Nari whispered. "What do you know about him?" Daiho's aide, an elderly Valerian named Taman, stepped forward with a datapad. "He has commanded ships in over 30 battles. His record shows 53 confirmed enemy vessel destructions. He led the human forces in the Outer Rim campaigns." Each word made Nari feel sicker. 53 ships meant thousands of deaths. The Outer Rim campaigns had been brutal conflicts, where entire solar systems changed hands multiple times. "He is a killer," she said quietly. "He is a soldier," her father replied. "And soldiers understand duty, just as you must understand yours." Nari turned away from her father and walked to the great window that looked out over their capital city. Below, millions of Valerians went about their daily lives. They tended crystal gardens, composed telepathic symphonies, and studied the ancient arts of their people. They were peaceful, civilized, refined. How could she marry someone who represented everything opposite to their way of life? "The ceremony will take place in 1 month," Daiho said behind her, "on Harmony Point Station, neutral ground." "A month?" Nari spun around. "That is not enough time to prepare." "It is enough time for you to accept your fate," her father said, but his voice was gentle. "Nari, I know this is hard, but think of our people. Think of the children who will grow up in peace because of this sacrifice." After leaving the throne room, Nari retreated to her private chambers. She dismissed her servants and sat alone on her balcony, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the human warrior was probably receiving the same news. She wondered what he thought of marrying an alien princess. Did humans even have emotions like fear or sadness? The stories made them sound like fighting machines. Far across the galaxy, Captain Jiho Kim stood in his ship's briefing room, reading his new orders. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Minho Park, waited patiently for his response. "A political marriage," Jiho said finally. "I suppose it makes sense from a strategic standpoint." "Sir, the Valerian Empire controls key trade routes," Minho replied. "This alliance would secure our eastern borders and give us access to their crystal technology." Jiho nodded. He was a soldier, trained to think about objectives and resources. Personal feelings did not matter when the security of humanity was at stake. What do we know about the princess? Minho consulted his data pad. Princess Nari, age 97 in human years, though she appears young by their standards. Valerians live for centuries. She is reportedly intelligent, well-educated in diplomatic arts, and skilled in telepathic communication. Telepathic? Jiho frowned. That could be problematic. Humans had no natural mental defenses against telepathic species. Yes, sir. But according to our intelligence, Valerians consider it rude to read minds without permission. Their telepathy is mainly used for art and communication. Jiho walked to his cabin's small window and looked out at the stars. He had spent his entire adult life fighting to protect human colonies and trade routes. Now, instead of defeating enemies with weapons, he would secure peace with a marriage contract. It felt strange, but he had faced stranger missions. Sir, Minho continued carefully, the reports suggest that Princess Nari is quite frightened about this arrangement. Apparently, she has heard stories about human military practices. What kind of stories? The usual propaganda, that we are violent, unpredictable, that we show no mercy in battle. Jiho almost smiled. Some of that is true. We do not show mercy to enemies who threaten innocent people. Yes, sir. But the princess may not understand the difference between protecting civilians and being cruel. Over the following days, both Nari and Jiho prepared for their meeting. Nari studied human customs and tried to control her fear. She practiced meditation techniques to calm her telepathic abilities, which tended to flare up when she was emotional. Jiho read reports about Valerian culture and learned basic phrases in their musical language. He also had his medical officer explain the physical differences between humans and Valerians, in case the knowledge proved useful. Neither of them was excited about the marriage, but both understood their duty. As the day of departure approached, Nari made one last attempt to change her father's mind. She found him in his private study, working on diplomatic documents. Father, please reconsider. Surely there is another way. Deho looked up from his papers, his expression sad but determined. Daughter, do you remember the old story about the crystal bird and the iron eagle? Nari nodded. It was a children's tale about two different creatures who learned to fly together. The crystal bird was beautiful and graceful but fragile. The iron eagle was strong and fierce but harsh. Alone, neither could survive the great storm that threatened their forest. But together, the eagle's strength protected the bird, and the bird's grace guided the eagle safely through the wind. It is just a story, Father. All the best truths start as stories, Deho replied. Perhaps this human warrior is not the monster you imagine. Perhaps you are not as helpless as you believe. As Nari left her father's study, she wondered if there might be truth in his words. But deep in her heart, she still feared that marrying Captain Jiho Kim would be the end of everything she held dear. Harmony Point Station hung in space like a giant metal flower. Its neutral territory status made it the perfect place for difficult meetings between different species. Princess Nari arrived with a full escort of Valerian guards, their crystal armor gleaming under the station's artificial lights. She had barely slept during the 3-day journey. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined meeting the human warrior. In her dreams, he was always covered in blood and carrying terrible weapons. Captain Jiho Kim arrived 2 hours after the Valerian delegation. His ship was smaller but more heavily armed. When he stepped onto the docking platform, Nari got her first look at the man she was supposed to marry. He was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders and dark hair cut short in military style. His uniform was clean and simple, not the battle armor she had imagined. But she could see scars on his hands and a long plasma burn across the left side of his neck. Those scars told stories of violence and pain. Jiho walked toward the Valerian group with steady, measured steps. When he was 10 feet away, he stopped and offered a small bow, the correct Valerian greeting that he had learned from his cultural briefings. Princess Nari, he said in careful Valerian, I am honored to meet you. His voice was deeper than she expected and surprisingly gentle. But Nari was too frightened to appreciate his effort to speak her language. Her crystalline skin flickered with nervous energy, sending pale blue light across the docking bay. "Captain Kim," she replied in accented but clear human standard. "The honor is mine." The formal introductions continued with Emperor Daeho, Ambassador, Hyunwoo Choi, and various military officers from both sides, but Nari barely heard the words. She kept staring at Jiho's scarred hands and wondering how many people those hands had killed. When Jiho offered his hand in the traditional human greeting, Nari stepped backward instinctively. The movement was small, but everyone noticed it. An awkward silence fell over the group. "Perhaps," Ambassador Choi said quickly, "we should proceed to the diplomatic quarters. There will be time for personal introductions during dinner." The dinner that evening was held in Harmony Point's finest restaurant. The neutral staff had prepared foods that both species could safely eat, though the results were bland and uninspiring. Nari sat between her father and Jiho, trying to make polite conversation while fighting the urge to run away. Every time Jiho moved his hand to reach for his water glass or cut his food, she tensed slightly. "Princess Nari," Jiho said during a lull in the conversation, "I understand you enjoy poetry." She looked at him in surprise. "Yes, how did you know that?" "I was briefed about your interests. I have read some translations of Valerian poetry. The Crystal Song verses are quite beautiful." This was not what Nari had expected from a ruthless warrior. "You read poetry?" "When I have time between missions," Jiho replied. "I find it helps me remember why we fight. To protect beautiful things." The comment might have been touching, except that it reminded Nari of all the fighting he had done. She imagined him reading poetry between battles, his hands still stained with enemy blood. "What kind of poetry do you prefer?" she asked, trying to be polite. "Old Earth verses about honor and sacrifice. There is one poem about a soldier who plants a tree before going to war, hoping it will grow tall while he is gone. Did he return to see the tree?" Jiho's expression grew sad. "The poem does not say, but the tree grew, and that was what mattered to him." Nari felt a strange flutter in her chest. There was something in Jiho's voice when he spoke about the poem, a gentleness that did not match her expectations. The conversation was interrupted when Ambassador Choi asked about Nari's crystal gardens. She began to explain the delicate art of growing living crystals that sang in harmony with telepathic energy. "It sounds fascinating," Jiho said. "I once saw a garden world during the Centauri campaign. The flowers there changed colors with the seasons, shifting from blue to gold to deep purple. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." Nari smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. "That sounds wonderful. I would love to visit such a place." "You cannot," Jiho said without thinking. "We had to destroy it 3 days later. The enemy was using it as a base to attack civilian transports." The smile vanished from Nari's face. In that moment, all her fears came rushing back. This human had looked at something beautiful and then destroyed it. How could she marry someone who casually spoke of destroying entire worlds? "I see," she said quietly, and turned her attention back to her food. Jiho realized his mistake immediately. He had meant to share a memory of beauty, but instead reminded her of the necessary destruction that war brought. He tried to explain the tactical situation, the civilian lives that had been saved, but Nari was no longer listening. The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. Later that night, Nari could not sleep. She walked through the station's corridors until she found herself in the observation lounge. The room had huge windows that looked out into space, showing thousands of distant stars. She stood at the window, trying to calm her racing thoughts. In a few weeks, she would be married to a man who destroyed beautiful things. Her people valued art, music, and the creation of lovely objects. How could she live with someone whose job was the opposite? "I am sorry about what I said at dinner." Nari spun around to find Jiho standing in the doorway. He was no longer wearing his formal uniform. Instead, he wore simple clothes that made him look less like a military officer and more like a regular person. "You could not sleep either?" she asked. "I rarely sleep well in new places," Jiho admitted, walking slowly toward the windows. He stopped, several feet away from her, respecting her need for space. I wanted to explain about the garden world. You do not need to explain. War is war. No, Jiho said firmly. You deserve to understand. That world was not just pretty. It was home to 3 million colonists, families with children. The enemy had placed weapon platforms in the flower fields, using the beauty as camouflage. They were killing civilian ships that passed through the system. Nari listened despite herself. We spent 2 days trying to find another solution, Jiho continued. We offered to relocate the colonists. We tried precision strikes. We even offered to trade prisoners for the planet. But the enemy refused everything. They wanted to use those families as human shields. So you destroyed it all. We destroyed the weapon platforms and the enemy base. The flowers died because of the orbital bombardment, but the people lived. 3 million colonists were evacuated safely. For the first time, Nari looked directly at Jiho's face. In the starlight, streaming through the windows, she could see the sadness in his eyes. You still think about it, she said. It was not a question. Every day, Jiho replied. Every beautiful thing we have to destroy to save lives. Every choice between bad and worse. That is what command means. Nari felt something shift inside her chest. She had expected to marry a monster who enjoyed violence. But this man carried the weight of difficult decisions like a heavy burden. The poem you mentioned, she said quietly, about the soldier and the tree. You are that soldier, are you not? Jiho was quiet for a long moment. I planted an oak tree outside my family home before my first deployment. It was just a small sapling. Then, have you seen it since? Once, on leave 3 years ago. It had grown taller than the house. His voice was soft. My mother sent me a picture last month. It has acorns now, as they stood together in the starlight, separated by 3 feet of space and a lifetime of different experiences. Nari began to wonder if she had been wrong about everything. Perhaps the human warrior was not a monster after all. Perhaps he was just a man trying to protect the things he loved, even when it cost him everything beautiful in his own life. Over the next 2 weeks, Nari and Jiho were forced to attend various ceremonies and meetings as part of their engagement. At first, these events were awkward and formal, but slowly, something began to change between them. During a cultural exchange, dinner, Nari performed a traditional crystal song for the mixed audience of humans and Valerians. She stood in the center of the room, her crystalline skin glowing with soft light as she began to sing. To the Valerians present, the performance was breathtaking. Her telepathic abilities created layers of melody that touched their minds directly, telling stories of ancient love and sacrifice. The crystal formations in her hair resonated with her voice, adding harmonies that spoke of loss and hope. The humans could only hear the audible portions of the song, a beautiful but incomplete experience. When Nari finished, the Valerians were moved to tears while the humans applauded politely. Jiho approached her afterward. That was beautiful, he said simply. You could not hear all of it, Nari replied, still breathing heavily from the performance. The telepathic harmonies are half the song. I heard enough, Jiho said. Beauty is not always about understanding every detail. Sometimes it is about recognizing something precious, even when you cannot fully grasp it. Nari looked at him with surprise. His words showed a wisdom that she had not expected from a military officer. Do you have music in human culture? She asked. We do. Would you like to hear some? That evening, Jiho played recordings of human music for Nari in her temporary quarters. He started with classical pieces, orchestral works full of drama and emotion. Then he moved to folk songs that told stories of Earth's history. This one is about farmers who became soldiers to defend their homes, he explained as a simple melody filled the room. They were not professional warriors, just ordinary people who refused to let their families suffer. Nari listened carefully to the words. The song told of men who left their fields to fight, carrying pictures of their children and letters from their wives. Some never returned home, but they fought so that others could live in peace. It is sad, she said when the song ended. Most human war songs are sad, Jiho replied. We do not celebrate the fighting. We honor the sacrifice. Over the following days, they continued to share parts of their cultures. Nari taught Jiho basic telepathic meditation techniques, which helped him understand how her people communicated. In return, Jiho explained human military traditions that were about more than violence. We have a rule, he said one afternoon as they walked through the station's garden section. No soldier left behind. It means we never abandon our people, no matter how dangerous the rescue becomes, even if it costs more lives to save one person. Even then, because the moment we start calculating the worth of individual lives, we become the enemies we fight against. Nari was beginning to understand that human military culture was built on principles that were not so different from Valerian values. Both societies placed importance on protecting the innocent and taking care of their own people. The real test came during their third week on Harmony Point. Nari was in her quarters, preparing for another diplomatic dinner, when the station's alarms began to shriek. Emergency lights flashed red throughout the corridors. All personnel to emergency stations, the station's automated voice announced. We are under attack by unknown vessels. Nari's Valerian guards immediately surrounded her, but in the confusion she became separated from them. The station shook as explosions echoed through the hull. Emergency bulkheads began closing, sealing off damaged sections. Through the chaos, Nari heard someone shouting in a language she did not recognize. The attackers had boarded the station. She ran toward what she hoped was a safe area, but found herself trapped in a collapsing section of the station. Debris fell from the ceiling as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Nari pressed herself against a wall, her crystalline skin flickering, with fear as she tried to use her telepathic abilities to call for help. Then she heard gunfire coming closer. The attackers appeared around the corner, 3 cybernetic creatures wearing mismatched armor and carrying energy weapons. Ravagers, Nari realized with horror. Pirates who raided diplomatic meetings and sold prisoners as slaves. She tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Ravagers advanced toward her, speaking in their harsh mechanical voices about the price alien nobility would bring on the slave markets. That was when Captain Jiho Kim appeared behind them like a force of nature. Nari had heard stories about human warriors in battle, but seeing it in person was completely different. Jiho moved with deadly precision, using the damaged corridor like a weapon. He shot the first Ravager through a gap in its armor, rolled behind cover as the others returned fire, then used a piece of falling debris to crush the second attacker. The third Ravager tried to use Nari as a hostage, grabbing her with a mechanical arm and pressing a weapon to her head. For a moment, everyone was still. Drop weapon, human, the Ravager said in broken standard language, or pretty princess dies. Jiho met Nari's eyes across the damaged corridor. She saw something in his gaze that surprised her. Not cold calculation, but desperate concern for her safety. Let her go, Jiho said quietly. Take me instead. You not worth as much, the Ravager replied. But I am worth more to you alive than dead, Jiho said, taking a step forward. A human military officer? The intelligence services would pay well for me. As he spoke, Jiho was moving slowly to the side, positioning himself for a better angle. Nari realized he was risking his life to save her, just as he would for any soldier under his command. The moment came when the Ravager shifted its grip slightly. Jiho took the shot with incredible precision, hitting the pirate's weapon arm without harming Nari. As the creature roared in pain and rage, Jiho tackled it away from the princess. When Nari looked again, the Ravager was unconscious, and Jiho was bleeding from several cuts, but he was already helping her to her feet. Are you hurt? He asked, checking her for injuries. I am fine, Nari said, though she was shaking. You saved me. That is what partners do, Jiho replied simply. As they made their way to safety, Nari's mind was spinning. She had seen Jiho in combat, and it was indeed terrifying, but not in the way she had expected. His violence was not random or cruel. It was focused and purposeful, designed to protect rather than destroy. When human Marines arrived to secure the area, Nari watched how they interacted with their captain. They showed respect but also genuine affection. These were not mindless killers following a tyrant. They were professionals who trusted their leader because he had earned their loyalty. "Sir," Sergeant Yoon Ji-han reported, "we have secured the station. The Ravagers are retreating." "Casualties?" Ji-ho asked immediately. "3 wounded, none critical. The princess's guards are safe. They were helping evacuate civilians from the lower decks." Nari listened to this exchange and realized something important. When the station was attacked, Ji-ho's first concern was not military strategy or diplomatic implications. His first thought was for the people under his protection. Later, as medical teams treated the wounded and diplomats assessed the damage, Nari found herself watching Ji-ho carefully. He moved among the casualties, checking on both human and alien victims with equal concern. He coordinated with station security to ensure no more raiders were hiding in the damaged sections. This was the man she had been terrified to marry. A warrior, yes, but one who used his strength to shield others from harm. A killer, perhaps, but only of those who threatened innocent lives. That night, as Harmony Point limped back to normal operations, Nari made a decision. She sent a message to her father, informing him that she was ready to proceed with the marriage. Also sent a shorter message to Ji-ho. "Thank you for protecting me. I am beginning to understand who you really are." When Ji-ho received the message, he sat in his quarters for a long time, staring at the words on his communication device. For the first time since receiving his marriage orders, he allowed himself to hope that this arrangement might become something more than a political necessity. Perhaps the crystal bird and the iron eagle could learn to fly together after all. After the Ravager attack, everything changed between Nari and Ji-ho. The princess began seeking him out, asking questions about his past and his people. She wanted to understand the man behind the warrior's reputation. They met every morning in the station's observation lounge, sharing breakfast and conversation while watching the stars. Ji-ho told her about his childhood on a farming colony, where his parents grew food for the expanding human settlements. The soil was red clay, he said one morning, describing his homeworld. "Nothing would grow there at first, but my father was patient. He spent years adding nutrients, building terraces, fighting the harsh weather. Eventually, we had the most productive farm in the sector." "Is that where you learned to be so determined?" Nari asked. "Maybe. My father always said that if something is worth having, it is worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible." Nari learned that Ji-ho had not chosen to be a soldier. When raiders attacked his colony, he had been forced to join the defense force at age 16. His first battle was protecting his own family farm. "I was terrified," he admitted. "I had never held a weapon before that day. But when I saw the raiders burning our neighbors' homes, I knew I had to act. You could have run away. Where would I run to? This was my home. These were my people." Ji-ho looked out at the stars. "Humans do not have many safe worlds. We cannot afford to give up the ones we have." In return, Nari shared stories about her sheltered life in the Crystal Palace. She had been raised to believe that violence was always wrong, that civilized beings should solve problems through discussion and compromise. "What happens when discussion fails?" Ji-ho asked gently. "We try harder to find common ground." "And when there is no common ground? When your enemy wants to destroy everything you love?" Nari was quiet for a long time. "I suppose that is when people like you become necessary." Over the weeks, they discovered shared interests that surprised them both. Ji-ho collected ancient books about philosophy and ethics. Nari studied the mathematics of crystal harmonics. Both enjoyed long walks and quiet conversations about the nature of duty and sacrifice. "I used to think humans were monsters," Nari admitted one evening as they stood in the garden section of the station. "But you are nothing like the stories." "What stories did you hear?" "That humans show no mercy, that you enjoy violence, that you destroy everything beautiful in the galaxy." Ji-ho considered this. "We do not show mercy to enemies who threaten civilians. We use violence when peaceful solutions fail, and yes, sometimes we must destroy beautiful things to save innocent lives, but we take no joy in it." "I'm beginning to understand that." Their growing friendship created complications that neither had expected. Other Valyrian nobles began expressing concern about Nari's attachment to the human captain. Duke Wansik, who led the opposition to the marriage alliance, sent several messages questioning whether the princess was being influenced by human psychological manipulation. "Your Highness," Duke Wansik said during a video conference, "I fear this human is using alien courtship techniques to cloud your judgment. He is teaching me about human culture," Nari replied firmly. "Is that not what I should do before marrying him? You are becoming too fond of him. This is dangerous for our people." On the human side, Admiral Young-ho expressed similar concerns to Ji-ho. "Captain, your reports show increasing personal attachment to the alien princess. This could compromise your ability to serve human interests." "My duty is to make this marriage alliance successful," Ji-ho replied. "That requires building trust with my future wife." "Trust, yes. Emotional involvement, no. Remember that this is a political arrangement, not a personal relationship." The crisis came when intelligence agents intercepted communications revealing the truth about the Ravager attack. It had not been a random raid. The attack had been arranged by Valyrian nobles who opposed the marriage alliance. Duke Wansik and his supporters had paid the Ravagers to attack Harmony Point during the engagement. Period. They had hoped that seeing Ji-ho in combat would terrify Nari into refusing the marriage. The plan was to make the human captain appear as the violent monster that Valyrian propaganda claimed all humans to be. Instead, the attack had shown Nari that Ji-ho's violence was protective rather than aggressive. The conspiracy had completely backfired. When Emperor Daeho learned about the plot, he was furious, but he was also faced with a difficult political situation. Duke Wansik represented nearly 40% of the Valyrian nobility. Punishing him too harshly could split the empire. "Father," Nari said when she learned about the conspiracy, "what will you do?" "I do not know," Daeho admitted. "If I exile Wansik, his supporters will claim I am choosing humans over Valyrians. If I ignore his crimes, I appear weak. And the marriage? Must be postponed until this political crisis is resolved." The news hit both Nari and Ji-ho hard. They had been growing closer every day, learning to respect and care for each other. Now political forces beyond their control were pulling them apart. "Perhaps it is for the best," Ji-ho said when they met that evening in the observation lounge. "Your people are not ready for this alliance." "Some of my people," Nari corrected. "Others understand that we need peace with humanity." "Enough to make this work? Or will we always face opposition and sabotage?" Nari had no answer for that question. Meanwhile, human military leaders were having second thoughts about Captain Ji-ho's fitness for the mission. Admiral Young-ho called him to a private meeting. "Captain, your psychological profile shows significant emotional attachment to the alien princess. This makes you a security risk. I am following orders to build a successful marriage alliance. You are falling in love with your target," Young-ho said bluntly. "That compromises your judgment. What happens if Valyrian and human interest conflict? Will you choose your wife over your people?" "I would choose what is right." That is exactly the problem. Right becomes subjective when personal feelings are involved. Both Nari and Ji-ho found themselves under pressure from their own governments to step back from the marriage. The political alliance that had seemed so important was now viewed as too dangerous by conservative factions on both sides. Duke Wansik held rallies claiming that the marriage would contaminate Valyrian culture with human aggression. Human politicians worried that Captain Ji-ho's attachment to an alien princess would make him unreliable in future conflicts. The final crisis came when Emperor Daeho announced that the marriage would be postponed indefinitely, while both governments reassessed the political implications. That night, Nari came to Ji-ho's quarters for what might be their last private conversation. "They are going to separate us," she said quietly. "It appears so. Do you regret any of this?" Ji-ho thought carefully before answering. "I regret that politics must interfere with personal relationships. I regret that some people on both sides are too afraid to try something new. But I do not regret getting to know you." "Nor I you," Nari replied. "You are not the monster I expected to marry. You are a good man trying to do an impossible job." And you are not the spoiled alien princess I was briefed about. You are brave, and intelligent and kind. They stood together in silence, both knowing that tomorrow might bring orders to return to their home worlds. The marriage alliance that had begun as a political necessity had become something neither had expected. The foundation of a genuine partnership. If we were ordinary people, Nari said softly, without empires and armies and political responsibilities, would you still want to marry me? Yes, Jiho said without hesitation. Would you want to marry me? Yes. But they were not ordinary people. They were a princess and a captain, representatives of their entire species. The question now was whether their personal feelings mattered more than their public duties. Outside the window, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the struggles of the small beings who loved and fought and dreamed beneath their light. 3 weeks after the marriage was postponed, disaster struck the galaxy. The hegemony of Keth, a brutal empire that had been watching human and Valerian space for signs of weakness, launched massive invasions of both territories simultaneously. Their strategy was simple and devastating. With the marriage alliance cancelled, humans and Valerians had no formal cooperation agreements. The Kethians could attack both species separately, preventing them from combining their military strengths. The first reports came from the outer colonies. Kethian battle fleets equipped with stolen technology from a dozen conquered species swept through the border systems like a plague. They showed no mercy to civilians, turning entire worlds into burning wastelands. On the human side, Admiral Young-ho found himself facing an enemy that outnumbered his forces 3-1. Human ships were technically superior, but the Kethians had overwhelming numbers and no concern for their own casualties. Sir, Lieutenant, Minho Park reported to Captain Jiho, the enemy has taken 7 human colonies in the past week. Our forces are stretched too thin to mount an effective defense. Meanwhile, Emperor Daeho watched in horror as his own territories fell to Kethian brutality. The elegant Valerian fleet designed for exploration and peaceful missions was no match for the enemy's crude but effective warships. Duke Wansik, who had opposed the human alliance, now faced the consequences of his sabotage. Your Majesty, he said during an emergency council meeting, perhaps we should consider negotiating with the Kethians. They do not negotiate, Daeho replied grimly. They conquer or they destroy. There is no third option. Princess Nari watched the reports with growing anguish. Her people were dying while she sat safely in the Crystal Palace. The marriage alliance that might have prevented this catastrophe had been destroyed by fear and political games. Father, she said during a private meeting, we must contact the humans. Surely Captain Kim's people would help us if we asked. On what basis? Daeho asked. We have no treaty, no alliance. We cancelled the marriage that would have bound our peoples together. Then I will create a new alliance. Before her father could stop her, Nari left the palace and commandeered the fastest ship in the Valerian fleet. Her plan was desperate and possibly suicidal, but it was the only hope she could see. Captain Ek. Jiho was commanding the defense of the Tauseti system when Nari's ship appeared on his sensors. The human fleet was badly outnumbered, facing a Kethian armada that seemed determined to destroy every human settlement in the sector. Sir, his communications officer reported, we are receiving a transmission from a Valerian vessel. It is Princess Nari. Put her through. Nari's image appeared on the main screen, her crystalline skin flickering with determination rather than fear. Behind her, Jiho could see Valerian naval officers preparing for battle. Captain Kim, she said formally, I bring reinforcements from the Valerian Empire. We request permission to join your defense of this system. Princess, this is not your fight. It became our fight the moment we allowed fear to divide us, Nari replied. The Kethians are attacking both our peoples because they believe we cannot work together. Let us prove them wrong. Jiho made a command decision that would have horrified Admiral Young-ho. Without authorization from human command, he accepted the Valerian reinforcements and began coordinating a joint defense. The battle that followed became legendary in both human and Valerian military history. Jiho's tactical brilliance combined with Nari's telepathic coordination abilities created a fighting force that was greater than the sum of its parts. Valerian ships, guided by telepathic reconnaissance that could see through Keithian jamming, delivered precise strikes against enemy command vessels. Human fighters, protected by Valerian crystal ship shields, executed bombing runs that crippled the enemy fleet's heavy units. Nari established telepathic links with every Valerian in the combined fleet, using their collective mental energy to guide human missile salvos with impossible accuracy. The strain was enormous, causing her crystalline skin to crack with overuse of her abilities. "Princess," Jiho said over the comm, "you are pushing yourself too hard. Pull back." "Not until this is finished," Nari replied, her voice tight with pain but firm with resolve. The turning point came when Keithian reinforcements arrived from hyperspace, threatening to overwhelm the combined human-Valerian fleet. The enemy commander broadcast a surrender demand, promising to spare military personnel if all civilian populations were handed over for processing. "Sir," Minho reported, "enemy reinforcements outnumber us 4-1. Recommend tactical withdrawal." Jiho looked at the tactical display, then at the image of Nari on his communication screen. She was barely conscious, her telepathic abilities stretched to their limits, but she met his eyes with unwavering determination. "Princess," he said quietly, "can you link with the entire fleet, human and Valerian together?" "I can try. Do it. Everyone follows my tactical commands, but use your telepathy to guide our weapons. We end this now." What happened next became known as the miracle of Tau Ceti. Nari created a telepathic network that connected every mind in the Allied fleet, human and Valerian alike. For the first time in galactic history, two different species fought as a single, perfectly coordinated organism. Human tactical thinking merged with Valerian intuitive awareness. Every pilot knew exactly where their wingman was without looking. Every gunner could predict enemy movements with precognitive accuracy. Every ship captain could coordinate with the fleet as if they shared a single mind. The Keithian armada, despite their superior numbers, found themselves fighting an enemy that anticipated their every move. Human ships struck at weak points that Valerian telepaths identified instantly. Valerian weapons targeted critical systems with precision, guided by human tactical analysis. When the battle ended 6 hours later, the Keithian fleet was in full retreat. The combined casualties were surprisingly light, thanks to the unprecedented cooperation between the Allied forces. But the cost to Nari was severe. The mental strain of linking so many minds across two different species had pushed her telepathic abilities far beyond safe limits. She collapsed on her ship's bridge, her crystalline skin dim and cracked. Emperor Daeho and Admiral Youngho both arrived at Tau Ceti within days of the victory. They found their children in the medical bay of Jiho's flagship, with the human captain, maintaining a constant vigil beside the unconscious Valerian princess. "Captain," Admiral Youngho said, "you exceeded your authority by accepting alien reinforcements." "Yes, sir. You coordinated military operations with a foreign power without government approval." "Yes, sir. And you risked your entire fleet on an untested telepathic battle coordination system." "Yes, sir." Admiral Youngho was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical reports from the battle. "Your actions saved this system and potentially both of our species." "Well done, Captain." Emperor Daeho approached his daughter's medical bed, his expression filled with worry and pride. "Will she recover?" "The doctors believe so," Jiho replied. "But it will take time. She pushed herself beyond all reasonable limits to make the mind link work." "She did what I could not," Daeho said quietly. "She found a way to unite our peoples when politics had failed." Over the following weeks, the joint human-Valerian fleet continued to win victories against the Keithian invasion. The telepathic coordination system that Nari had pioneered became the foundation for a new style of interspecies warfare. When Duke Wansik saw the effectiveness of the human-Valerian alliance, his opposition crumbled. Standing before the Valerian Council, he publicly apologized for his role in sabotaging the original marriage agreement. "I was wrong," he admitted. I let fear and prejudice blind me to the potential for cooperation with humanity. Princess Nari has shown us that unity makes us stronger, not weaker. The war's final battle took place at the Twin Sun system, where the combined human-Valyrian fleet met the main Kethian armada in decisive combat. Emperor Daiho and Admiral Youngho both commanded from the flagship's bridge, watching as Jiho and Nari coordinated the battle with seamless precision. Nari had recovered enough to establish limited telepathic links, while Jiho commanded the tactical elements of the engagement. Together they guided the Allied fleet to a victory so complete that the Kethian hegemony surrendered unconditionally. When the war ended, there was no longer any political opposition to the marriage alliance. The effectiveness of human-Valyrian cooperation had been proven beyond all doubt. The wedding took place 3 months later on Harmony Point Station, where Nari and Jiho had first met. The ceremony blended traditions from both cultures, creating something entirely new and beautiful. As Princess Nari and Captain Jiho exchanged vows, they represented more than just a political alliance. They embodied the hope that different species could learn to understand and support each other. 1 year later, they stood together on the observation deck where they had first begun to truly see each other. Nari was pregnant with the first human-Valyrian hybrid child, a symbol of the new era they had helped create. "Do you ever regret it?" Nari asked, placing her hand on her growing belly. "Choosing love over the simple life of a soldier?" "Never," Jiho replied, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You taught me that some things are worth fighting for not because they are easy, but because they are precious."